When Evelyn Grant first stepped off the train into the humid, restless night air of East Hollow, she felt the weight of old ghosts pressing down on her shoulders. The town hadn't changed much since she'd left it behind 16 years ago, same cracked sidewalks under sleepy streetlights, same tiny diner with its flickering neon sign promising stale coffee and a slice of pie that tasted like yesterday's regrets. But the air felt heavier now, like it knew she was coming back with secrets stitched into the lining of her coat. Undercover assignments had a way of dragging you back to the places you tried hardest to outrun. Evelyn had learned that lesson early on in her bureau career. Bad men always circled back to small places because they knew small places rarely had big eyes watching. But tonight, East Hollow wasn't just her next assignment. It was the graveyard of who she used to be, and the unlikely rebirth of who she was trying to become. She tugged the brim of her worn ball cap lower over her brow and adjusted the simple duffel bag on her shoulder. No gun visible, no badge in sight. Just another tired woman stepping off a late-night train in a town too poor to care. But inside her bag, under a folded sweatshirt and a flask of cold coffee, lay the badge that could silence questions and open doors no local cop dared to knock on. It wasn't just a badge to her, it was armor she'd forged out of long nights studying case files, endless push-ups on dusty gym floors, and years of pretending she didn't hear the whispers that a girl like her wouldn't last in the bureau. But the badge stayed hidden for now, because the badge was power, and power only worked when you knew exactly when to draw it. The plan was simple enough. Pose as a drifter, get a feel for the old crew she'd been tracking for 6 months, slip in, slip out, collect enough dirt to drag them back into daylight where they couldn't hide behind local ties and bribed deputies. But East Hollow had its own plans for her, and it started with the crooked smile of Officer Hank Dennison. Hank was exactly the kind of local cop Evelyn had trained her whole life to avoid, too young for his badge to mean anything, too arrogant for it not to mean everything. He spotted her the moment she stepped off the platform. He leaned against his cruiser like he owned the cracked asphalt it sat on. He didn't tip his hat when he spoke, just sized her up like she was a stray dog sniffing around his yard. "Ma'am," he drawled, voice thick with the kind of southern familiarity that turned her stomach. "You got somewhere you're headed tonight? Or you planning on wandering around till trouble finds you?" Evelyn offered him the smallest smile she could muster. Just enough to be polite, not enough to invite more. "Just passing through." Hank clicked his tongue, eyes drifting to her bag, then back to her face. "Funny thing about folks passing through this time of night, seems they always got something they're hoping won't be seen." She could have ended it right there, pulled out her badge, watched his smirk melt into apologies and thinly veiled fear. But that wasn't the plan. The plan was to stay invisible until she wasn't. "I've got nothing you need to worry about, officer," she said calmly. But Hank Dennison wasn't the kind of man who let things go just because they didn't need fixing. He pushed off the car and stepped closer, close enough that Evelyn could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "Bag on the ground, ma'am. Gonna have to take a look." A part of her wanted to say no, to flash that badge and watch him stammer. But another part, older, wiser, bruised by too many assignments gone sideways, knew this was the story she'd signed up to live. So she set the bag down slow, careful not to let the weight of her badge make her hand tremble. He unzipped it roughly, rummaging through her things like a raccoon rooting through trash. He made a show of pulling out her sweatshirt, flicking open her notebook, sniffing her old thermos. Every scrap of her life on display for his cheap curiosity. "What's this?" he asked, pulling out her small leather wallet. He flipped it open, eyes narrowing when he found nothing but a couple of crumpled receipts and a folded photo of her father's old truck, her way of remembering why she'd left this town the first chance she got. "Personal," she said, voice flat. "You done?" Hank just laughed, a mean, hollow sound that made the shadows around the train station seem to pull back in disgust. He dropped her things back into the bag one by one, slow enough to make sure she knew who was in charge. "You got somewhere to stay tonight?" he asked, but it wasn't kindness, just another threat dressed up like concern. "Got a room at the Hollow Inn," she lied. The Hollow Inn had closed 5 years ago, burned out in a kitchen fire nobody bothered to rebuild. She was counting on Hank not knowing that. But Hank Dennison knew his town too well. He clicked his tongue again, that mocking grin splitting wider across his face. "Ain't no Hollow Inn anymore, ma'am. Guess that means you'll be coming with me." Her pulse quickened. This wasn't how it was supposed to go, her cover depended on nobody looking too closely. But the badge pressed cold against her side, reminding her that she still had an ace to play. Not yet, though. Not yet. Hank nudged her bag toward her with the toe of his boot. "Go on, pick it up. Don't want folks thinking I'm rough on lady drifters." She knelt to grab it, and when she stood, she caught a flicker of movement across the street, just a kid on a battered bike, watching them with wide eyes. For a split second, Evelyn wondered what he saw. A tired woman. A cocky cop. A scene that could end any number of ways. "Let's go, ma'am," Hank said, placing a heavy hand on her shoulder. Evelyn swallowed the sharp retort on her tongue. She felt the badge inside her coat pocket like a heartbeat. Soon, she promised herself. But not yet, the squad car smelled like old leather and fresh sweat. Hank's radio crackled with half-heard reports about potholes and noise complaints, but he barely acknowledged them. Evelyn sat in the back seat, hands folded neatly in her lap like she was waiting for Sunday service, not a half-baked arrest that would test every ounce of patience she'd built up during 14 years in the bureau. They drove past the rusting water tower, down streets that hadn't seen fresh asphalt since she was a kid. The town felt smaller now, shrunken by lost businesses and boarded-up windows. The people who'd stayed behind looked the same tired eyes, same cautious glances. She wondered how many of them would recognize her if she stepped out wearing the badge that now pressed harder against her ribs than the seatbelt ever could. The cruiser rolled to a stop in front of the tiny East Hollow police station, a squat brick building that tried to look important but only managed to look sad. Hank opened her door with exaggerated politeness. "This way, ma'am." Inside, the station smelled of burnt coffee and paper that had been damped too many times and dried out too slow. A lone desk sergeant, older, heavy-set, eyes dulled by too many years of half-hearted patrols, looked up as they entered. "Who's this?" he asked, voice scratchy as gravel. "Vagrant," Hank said. "No ID. Says she's staying at the Hollow Inn." The sergeant frowned. "Ain't no Hollow Inn, Hank." Evelyn said nothing. She let them write their little play, let them feel big and important for half a heartbeat longer. She needed this. Needed them to believe she was no one, so when the hammer dropped, they'd remember it for the rest of their lives. Hank nudged her forward. "Put your bag there. We'll log it." She did as told, watching as he pretended to catalog her things. He pulled out her notebook again, flipped through pages filled with careful handwriting, coded notes that would mean nothing to him but everything to her handler if she never made it back. He smirked when he found the photo of her father's truck again. "Daddy's girl, huh?" he sneered. She met his eyes, calm and steady. "He'd have liked you." He believed in small men with shiny toys. Hank's smile faltered for a split second, but the sergeant barked a laugh that covered it up. "Got any warrants, miss?" "No," she said. She could have lied. Could have told them anything. But the badge was still there, humming under her coat like a secret she was dying to share. Hank gestured to the back rooms. "We'll keep her in holding tonight. Figure out what to do with her in the morning." The sergeant shrugged. "Ain't got no women's cell. She stays in the interview room." Evelyn's heart beat faster, not from fear, but from the way the pieces clicked into place. Holding her overnight meant she'd missed the meet she'd set up with her contact in town. The crew she was hunting would spook if she didn't show. Weeks of work, gone. Unless... Hank grabbed her elbow, not rough, but firm enough to make his point. He steered her down a narrow hallway lined with faded wanted posters and cheap wood paneling. The interview room looked exactly like she remembered from training: plain table, 2 metal chairs, a single buzzing light overhead that made everyone look guilty. He pushed her in and closed the door behind them. Didn't lock it. Didn't need to. She could tell by the way he leaned against the door that he thought he was bigger than any lock. "You're not from here," Hank said, voice lower now, stripped of its fake friendliness. "Don't know who you think you are, but East Hollow don't take kindly to strangers sticking their noses in business that ain't theirs." Evelyn tilted her head, letting the silence stretch until it wrapped around him like a noose. "Funny," she said softly. "I could say the same about you." His eyes narrowed. "You got a smart mouth for someone in cuffs." She hadn't been cuffed yet. That was his first mistake. The second was assuming she'd let him. Hank stepped closer, just a breath away. He leaned in, the stale coffee and cheap aftershave coiling around her like oil slick on water. "Why don't you tell me what you're really doing here?" And just like that, she knew the moment had come. Evelyn reached into her coat pocket, slow and deliberate. Hank's hand twitched toward his holster, but she moved faster, flipping her wallet open with a quiet click. The gold FBI badge caught the overhead light like a blade. For half a second, the world froze. The hum of the fluorescent light, the distant buzz of the dispatch radio, Hank's breath catching in his throat. "Special Agent Evelyn Grant," she said, voice calm, measured, carrying the weight of every training room, every courtroom, every busted door at dawn. "Undercover. I'd like my bag back now." Hank's mouth opened, then closed. His eyes flicked from the badge to her face, as if he could scrub the image from his mind if he stared hard enough. He took a step back, hit the door. His bravado drained out of him like stale beer from a punctured can. You can't just." She took a step forward, crowding the space he'd tried to claim. "Sit down, Officer Dennison." He sat. Hard. Like gravity had doubled just for him. Evelyn placed her badge on the table, the gold shield glinting under the sickly light. She unzipped her coat, pulling out the folder he hadn't found in her bag, tucked in a hidden pocket stitched into the lining. She dropped it in front of him, page after page of surveillance photos, wiretap transcripts, the kind of evidence that turns small-town thugs into federal inmates. "Your vagrant is here investigating a smuggling ring that's been using East Hollow as a pit stop," she said. "The men I'm tracking trust strangers more than they trust locals. That's why I came in quiet. You just blew 6 months of careful work." Hank swallowed, Adam's apple bobbing like a buoy in rough water. I didn't know." "No, you didn't," she cut in, voice sharp enough to shave him down to size. "Because you didn't ask. Because you thought you could score points by roughing up a stranger." She leaned in close, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. "Pray to whatever small-town god you believe in that this doesn't cost us the whole case." She left him sitting there, small and shaking in a chair he thought he owned. She stepped into the hallway, her badge now clipped to her belt where anyone could see it. The desk sergeant blinked when she walked back through the lobby, but she didn't stop to explain. There would be time for that later, for the paperwork, the apologies, the forced smiles that never reached anyone's eyes. Outside, the night air hit her like a baptism. The stars looked different now, brighter somehow. She closed her eyes, drew a deep breath, and for the first time since stepping off that train, she let herself feel just a flicker of warmth. Not because she'd put Hank in his place. Not because she'd won. But because when she flashed that badge, she'd reminded herself of who she really was, a girl from East Hollow who'd made it out and never looked back, until coming back meant she could make things right. A movement at the corner of the street caught her eye, the same kid on the battered bike. He watched her from the shadows, wide-eyed, like he'd just seen a ghost sprout wings. She smiled at him, small and real. "Go home, kid," she called softly. "Tell your mama you saw an angel tonight." The boy grinned, pushed off the curb, and vanished into the darkness. Evelyn turned her collar up against the chill, badge glinting in the streetlight. There was work to do. And now, she'd do it in the open, no more hiding, no more pretending to be less than she was. By dawn, the air above East Hollow was thick with the low thrum of engines and the brief bark of radios. Evelyn stood in the alley behind the abandoned hardware store that had served as the crew's unofficial headquarters for months. She'd spent the night reworking every detail of the bust, no more shadows, no more soft steps. Now it was search warrants, bulletproof vests, and federal vans that didn't need permission from local boys with shiny badges. Hank Dennison hovered a few feet away, still pale and stiff in his pressed uniform, eyes pinned to the cracked asphalt like it could swallow him whole if he just stared hard enough. He'd tried to apologize more than once, but Evelyn shut him down with a flick of her eyes every time. Words were cheap. What mattered now was the work. At exactly 5:12 a.m., the strike team moved in. They were bureau through and through, heavy boots, sharp commands, gloved hands snapping open padlocks like paper. Evelyn watched from the mouth of the alley, one hand resting on her hip near her holstered sidearm, the other on the radio clipped to her vest. Inside, muffled shouts ricocheted through the brick walls, startled men who thought they could run a gun pipeline through a ghost town without anyone noticing. Evelyn's lips curved into the smallest smile as she listened to the chaos. They'd underestimated East Hollow, and they'd underestimated the girl who'd once fled it with a suitcase of hand-me-down clothes and a heart full of restless hope. It didn't take long. When the first suspect stumbled out in cuffs. Shoulders hunched against the breaking dawn, head ducked to avoid the sting of cameras, Evelyn felt something loosen inside her. A knot she'd carried for too long, tied tight by every person who told her she'd never amount to more than a nobody from nowhere. By 7 a.m., the hardware store was empty except for evidence bags and echoing footsteps. Local deputies milled around the perimeter, eyes wide as they watched the FBI do what they never could. Hank stayed close, a silent reminder of what happened when pride got bigger than sense. Evelyn stood on the curb, drinking burnt coffee out of a foam cup, her badge catching the morning sun. She could feel the town stirring behind her, the whispers that would spread through every cracked screen door and corner diner by lunch. Some would call her arrogant for dragging East Hollow's dirt into daylight. Some would call her hero. She didn't care much for either. What she did care about was the boy on the bike. She spotted him again that afternoon, sitting on the steps of the old train station with his handlebars resting against one knee. He watched her the way a stray dog watches a stranger, curious but ready to bolt at the first sudden move. Evelyn crossed the street, boots crunching over gravel. She stopped in front of him, hands on her hips, badge still clipped to her belt like a promise. "You following me?" she asked, voice warm, edged with a tired smile. The boy shrugged, all sharp elbows and big eyes. "You really FBI?" She crouched down so they were eye level. "I really am." He pointed to the badge, finger hovering like it might burn him if he touched it. "Ain't never seen no FBI here before." Evelyn studied him, the way his jeans were 2 sizes too big, the hole in the toe of his sneaker, the ghost of bruises on his skinny wrist. She saw herself in him, clearer than any mirror. Small-town kid who'd been told he'd never be more than what this place decided for him. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked softly. His eyes darted to the empty street behind her, to the train tracks rusting under the July sun. "Ain't nowhere to go." She reached into her back pocket and pulled out the same folded photo Hank had mocked in the station. Her father's old truck, parked on the edge of a field the color of dried wheat. She held it out. "I didn't have nowhere to go either," she said. "But I left anyway. Sometimes that's the only way you find out who you're really gonna be." The boy took the photo, thumb brushing the creased edge. He didn't say thank you, didn't need to. His eyes said it for him. "You got a name?" she asked. "Tyler," he mumbled. "Tyler," she repeated. "Good name. If you ever need help getting out of here, you find me. You show them this photo, you say my name. People will listen." He squinted up at her, suspicion fighting with a tiny flame of hope. "You gonna come back?" Evelyn glanced over her shoulder at the station, the cracked sidewalks, the sunburned sky hanging over her childhood ghosts. She smiled, soft and sad. "Maybe. But even if I don't, you remember this, you ain't stuck here unless you decide you are." Tyler tucked the photo into his back pocket like it was a winning lottery ticket. He didn't say goodbye, just hopped on his bike and rode off, the wheels squeaking over the tracks that once carried her out too. Evelyn watched him go until he was just a blur at the end of Main Street. Then she turned back toward the waiting convoy of bureau vans, her breath fogging in the early heat. Hank Dennison stood by the cruiser, hat in hand, shame stitched into every line of his posture. He opened his mouth when she passed, but she lifted a hand to stop him. "Do better, Officer Dennison," she said, her voice steady, her heart light for the first time in months. "For the next kid who comes through your town." He nodded, wordless, because there was nothing left to say. Evelyn climbed into the front seat of her bureau car, badge glinting in the sun, ghosts trailing behind her like dust kicked up by a train that never stops running. She drove out of East Hollow with her window down, the wind tangling her hair as the town grew small in the rearview mirror. She was still that girl from nowhere, but now, nowhere knew exactly who she was. And she'd carry that truth like a badge long after this case was done.